All right. Hello, everybody. This is Albert, and we are back with another part of Raisin Soul's reading list. And for this part, we are going to be reading Belly of the Beast, The Politics of Anti-Fatness as Anti-Blackness by Deshaun L. Harrison. So, for those who don't know who Deshaun Harrison is, they are a black transmasculine non-binary person who is an organizer in Atlanta. I think in the Atlanta area mostly, but they also talk about abolition, gender, and things that we should be talking about when it comes to like anti-capitalism politics and stuff like that. So they also wrote some pieces for some notable publications that are black and queer trans led. So they did a lot of articles when it comes to like anti-fatness and anti-blackness and how all of those coincide with each other. And it's because of their work is how I learned about Sabrina String's Fearing the Black Body, which is another good book. So I would say this is more into like the contemporary focus of fat phobia, because Sabrina Strings is more into like art history, went into more into the eugenics side of it, and Deshaun went more into how it can help us in liberatory work. So let's get into it. So this is a very quick book, y'all. You can finish this in 3-4 days. Like it's really a easy read. It's very is not any academic jargon, which I do appreciate from Deshaun. You made it very it's very easy to digest for someone who's like trying to learn about fat phobia and how it coincides with racism and colonialism and capitalism. But yeah, this is a it was just it's just I can't put it down. It was like I was so engaged. Like it's so many. I if I could highlight entire pages, I would for this book. Like this is one of those books where you read something like so good you had to reread it. Like it's very good. But yeah, let's get into chapter 1, which is titled Beyond Self-Love. So in this chapter, Deshaun was talking about how body positivity isn't enough for fat people to live their lives. So body positivity is more into just feeling good about yourself. Self-care is more in the individual side, but it does nothing when it comes to the systems in place that are trying to oppress the black fat, which that's how they compose people that are in black communities and fat communities, the black fat. So all of those do nothing for people that are black and fat. So there's that those two dynamics, the intersectionality of anti-fatness and anti-blackness, and how it shapes the experience of those that are black and fat. So let me see if I highlighted anything that was worthy of notes. And shout out to my friend, my bestie, Alex, for letting me borrow this book. We exchanged some books. I gave them Fearing the Black Body, and they gave me Belly of the Beast. So we were so into like this topic. So let me see. Yes, and Alex actually highlighted this, so this is that tells me like how significant this part is. So, body positivity is benevolent anti-fatness in that it is masqueraded as some sort of semblance of acceptance for fat people when it is instead an opportunity for thinness to reroute but not give up its hold on fat people's collective liberation. Thinness, as a politic, thinness is a system that seeks to subjugate and ultimately eradicate fatness and fat people. Body positivity takes up this mantle through abandoning a fat politic, which ultimately insists on a world wherein fat people aren't discriminated against or marginalized for their fatness, and as such, people aren't categorized by the size of their bodies, and replacing it with one that makes a desire to lose weight a qualifier for the type of fat person that's worth celebrating and being nice to. So what they're saying is that body positivity is, it's right now it's really a co-opt movement. This is something where you can co-opt into. So it's like when you're thin, it's like when the people that are already the desirable ones, they already try to take up space when it comes to the body positive movements, when it really originated for fat people to be accepted. And the thing is, fat people shouldn't just be accepted, they should be embraced and liberated from the systems that are in place that are trying to oppress them. And body positivity, it just turns out it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So and they also went into how fat phobia is like a cage. It's like a cage for the black fat to navigate. And I like that they also compared it to like a queer person that's in the closet, because you're trying to perform yourself for the acceptance of people that are your oppressors. So that's what they're also saying, and Harrison is saying that we should liberate from that. And they also went into how beyond self-love, we need a radical self-love. So radical means we need to actually get into the roots of why these things are trying to keep us from loving ourselves, loving our bodies, and just accept them for the way they are, and realizing like our bodies are the ones that are just keeping us, trying to help us survive in this world. So it's not enough just to say I love my body, but it's another thing when you're going into what's keeping you from actually what's keeping you from interrogating these systems and policies and these ways of thinking for to put you in a place that puts you in a subjugated class, which is the marginalized and the oppressed. So that is that on chapter 1. Chapter 2 is titled Pretty Ugly, The Politics of Desire, which they went into more into desirability politics. So they explained it, they conceptualize this term called desire capital, which we go into what is pretty, what is beauty, what is ugly, and how fat phobia moves around in those spaces, in those categories in certain ways. Let me see. Yes, desire capital. That is to say, who owns or embodies more or less of the identities that grant one access, power, and resources. More to the point, pretty, beauty, and ugly, all with lowercase letters, are subjective. So they're saying, oh, it's just the subjective pretty, but they also talked about what's pretty, beauty, and ugly, and capitalized pretty, beauty, and ugly to emphasize what does society consider pretty, beauty, and ugly. And those tend to be people that are fair skin, people that are thin, people that are not fat, people that are white. So Eurocentric beauty standards of beauty, and how all of those are contributing to how we socialize into society. And yeah, not even just that, people with no disabilities, they also be categorized as the attractive, desirable ones. If we went into Black Madness, Black Madness, Mad Blackness, with Terry Pinkins. They also went into that. And they also went into how all of those creates all these sense of insecurities that we have in ourselves. So is this need to lose weight, this need to shed the fat from our bodies. Even if you're not fat at all, you have these insecurities, like you need to do something to your muscles, you need to go to the gym, you need to do your diets and all that stuff. So you always feel this need to try to get rid of fatness, and a lot of that contributes to a lot of eating disorders. If we really want to go there, it contributes to those disorders. It contributes to body dysmorphia. It contributes to all of these things that are trying to really kill yourself, really trying to do damage, and are actually unhealthy copanisms. And that's interesting because it's like fat people are the ones that are labeled the unhealthy ones, but really the unhealthy mechanisms is the things that white supremacist cis heteropatriarchy capitalism is trying to push on us as people. And let me see if there's anything I highlighted here. Yes, I said in many ways, and in other words, insecurities are a response to the violences ugly people are forced to endure. As such, ugly is political. It is the determiner for who does and does not work, who does and does not receive love, who does and does not die, who does and does not eat, who is and is not housed. And to that point, insecurities are valid. It is okay for us to be insecure in our bodies that are constantly beat on and berated. Those insecurities don't change the reality of what anti-fatness or overall ugliness is and what it does. In fact, those insecurities better contextualize it. So pretty much what I stated about how desirability politics is harming and oppressing not even just dark-skinned people, not just people that are disabled, but also we have to acknowledge how it's affecting fat people, and especially the black fat people. And all of that originated from colonialism, which we will get into in the next chapter. So this part was very interesting because Harrison coined this term called fuckability. So what they said here is being fuckable is determined by someone other than ourselves, and therefore it is completely about whether or not others locate desire in you. What fuckability as desirability means is that desirability is part of the human experience, and being seen as undesirable, specifically for the black fat, is at the heart of what helps to maintain the separation between the non-human and the human. And what this made me think about is in I'm trying to remember what book I also found this in, but in queer spaces, when there's dating involved or something like that, there's this thing called no fats no femmes, because fat people are not seen as the desirable partners. And when it comes to like how we go to on social media, like say like Instagram or something like that, we try to present our best selves on Instagram, and we don't and what we consider to be the best sense of ourselves is when we're gym bodied, we are Instagram models, we have the six-pack abs, we have all these qualifiers for what makes a person beautiful and desirable. But there's no room for people that do not fit those archetypes. So people that are fat, people that aren't gym body, whatever that means, people that are dark skin. When it comes to like those dynamics, it's who's more marketable. That also plays a part into it. And I also like what Harrison said here is that thinness as a politic demands that one consume less, desire less, rather than make the demand that we end a world where that one desires will leave others without. So to destroy anti-fatness and anti-Blackness, we must destroy desire, beauty, thinness, and whiteness. And what they're saying is that the systems that are in place to create these categories of who's the pretty one, who's the beautiful one, who's the ugly one. And not even just when it comes into like who we are attracted to, but the politics of it. So fat people are most likely to be unhoused. Fat people are most likely to get less access to resources. Fat people are most likely to be sexually harassed. Fat people are most likely to be harassed in the school system. So things of that sort we're trying to tackle. And they also went into like I said, fat people are most likely to be sexually violated. So they went into referencing Kiese Layman's Heavy memoir. That's another book that I am planning to read soon, Kiese Layman's Heavy. But they reference Layman being molested by his I think it's his babysitter. And how is seen the babysitter sees Layman as desirable by letting him putting her breast in his mouth. So she's seen him as desirable then, but it got to the point, it's got weird territory. I need to read Layman's book, but the babysitter had Layman watch her having sex with somebody else. So in a way, and I'm sure, Layman is underage by that time. So there's sexual violence right there. That's a very traumatic thing that happened to Layman. And they also went into how right here on page 23, fat people are sexually assaulted, but the confines of gender limit whose stories are told. So we all know that that men and women and non-binary people, the way sexual harassment works is very different for each category. Because overarchingly, fat people are not believed when they are victims and survivors, and yet fat women courageously share their stories despite their risk. And it's easy to not believe fat people because they're the ones that are undesirable. They're like, they try to sexually harass you. So that's another thing that fat people endure. And Harrison also says, however, seldom do we hear from victims and survivors who are fat black boys, and the lack of adequate and accessible data to support the claims of abuse does little for our supposed credibility. And it is for this reason that I write this from the personal, because not only is the personal political, but the political has not made room for data beyond the personal. And what Harrison got to share in this is this fantasy. This one stood out to me. The fantasy of people that are DL or down low. They have this fantasy and fetish for fat black people because a fat black man has the breasts that the women that they can, that are from, that we talk about from women. They have a lot of features that it's this fetishization for that, even for fat women, but for especially in an DL culture, the fat black people are the ones that are sexualized. They are not humanized, and that one stood out to me. And they also, Harrison said, though I was in fact, I had the weighted thighs, the pants that didn't really fit, the ass that moved without being prompted to, and because I did, I quickly learned that my body was not my own. So they also went into um, how when it comes to sports and agility and mobility and things of that sort, and how even though you could be like Mark Henry from WWE, or who else is a notable fat athlete, like you can be the fattest athlete or something like that, but people are always going to be nitpicking what is wrong with your body about that. And there are even fat gym trainers, and they get discriminated against. um let's see, is there anything else? And they also went into how black people are known to be fetishized. Like we get into the Mandingo and the Jezebel, or the Bucks, and you can see there it's clearly another experience when it comes to being black and fat. And I also like how they said here, quoting Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks defines patriarchy as a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything, and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. In Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, an American Grammar book, Horton Spiller's right to the loss of gender, or an altered reading of gender for black people, particularly and especially black women, after slavery through the ungendering of their body. Because if you're already dehumanized, you're already degendered. Is what I'm getting from that. So it's another thing when you're someone who probably who has a disability. And Terry Pinkins mentioned how disabled slaves were seen as disposable. They weren't seen as someone who can work, someone who can make them the most money. And it's the same thing when it comes to black fat people. And I think Harrison did mention about Sarah Bartman, who I talked about in Fearing the Black Body, who was a fat black South African woman who was seen as like a circus was used as a circus for enslavers and people that, and for white audiences they see her as a circus. They try to harass her, they mock her. It's kind of, she's notable for her size. So back then it was really gruesome back then. And I think that was it. They also went into like how the mammy is also a fat stereotype of a stereotype for fat black women, because fat black women, they stereotype as the mammies. They're stereotyped as the people that nurture and care for the family and the household. So there's also that stereotype. And I think that was it for chapter 2. So chapter 3 is titled Health in the Black Fat. So we all know that, I think especially during this pandemic, the CDC they do not have the credibility that they claim to have, because we also go here into like how health is really like a very blurry thing to really look at, because people, when we think of health, the first thing we think about is physical health. You don't talk about mental health and things of that sort. But it's this thing on like what health looks like. It looks like the gym. It looks like the athletes. It looks like these professional sports people. It looks like who's in the beauty pageants and things of that sort. But people who don't fit those are considered the unhealthy ones. And what I like here is Harrison said, as I interpret this, okay, I'm gonna start off. Harrison starts off the chapter saying, according to the World Health Organization, health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. As I interpret it, this means that for one to be healthy, they must not only be non-disabled, but must also be in an environment that allows for them to feel mentally secure, psychically safe, and socially well. As such, this means that Black people, especially those of us who exist with multiple marginalized identities, are always already unhealthy because we are always already unsafe. So, because of racism and anti-Blackness, we're already put in environments that are not safe for us. So, how can we be healthy? So, I found that as an interesting point to note. And Harrison went into the eugenics movement, how that contributes to the creation of race, and during when colonialism was around, European colonizers also paid attention to the physical qualities of people in Africa, and their size is something that they also try to pay attention to. They try to discriminate not just from their skin color, but also from their size, their abilities, and anything of that sort. So that created like another system to discriminate people on, because that shows you're more like the marginalized. You're not seen as the desirable one. And let me see. And all of that is what makes thinness coincide with whiteness. So, and we all know how dangerous whiteness is. And also, eugenics is the reason we have the medical industrial complex, the healthcare industrial complex, and a diet industrial complex, which, because of capitalism, are the multi-billion-dollar areas. Because we go into the medical, we're going to talk about the BMI, and if we really want to get into the BMI is not created by someone who is a physician or a scientist. It's created by a sociologist that was looking at people in Africa and trying to distinguish themselves from the Africans, and then when it is noted that a lot of the Africans are notably heavier than the Europeans use that as a way to create the institution that we know now as anti-Blackness. And we still use BMI to this day, even though it's been disproved and debunked that it does nothing to fit health. Because, like, say if you put like someone like LeBron James, and we know he's not fat, but he will be considered overweight or obese on the BMI because his weight and his height coincide with what is considered unhealthy. And then we go into like how these industries use dieting and exercise as a way to discipline us. And like, so like when people go try to work out or diet or anything like that, they're not doing that because they enjoy doing that. They are doing that to discipline themselves and feeling shame, and always have a shame for their insecurities that they have. So this might be spicy for y'all, but yeah, this is if we really like go into like why people go to the gym in the middle of a pandemic, are you really going there because you care about your health? No, you don't. You don't care about your health. You just want to be the desirable look. So that is what motivates these companies to thrive. And even in entertainment industry, like there's my 600 pound life, which is um which paints fat people in a bad light, because it's pretty much paying certain attention on like why they were fat, and why they were fat, and they should do something to address it. And not just my 600 pound life. There's The Biggest Loser. And funny as I've been hearing, the people that have been losing all that weight in The Biggest Loser, it's common for them to gain that back because it's a routine. It's just for the show. It's just a routine that they trying to do to win the prize. It's not for them to really is really not for them to really care for their health. So, and what Harrison also shared is this story of this 14-year-old girl named Gina Score, who was put into this fat camp that was by the military, and it shows how imperialism also contributes to anti-fatness. So Gina was tasked to do a 2.7 mile run, and while she was running, she passed out, and she was breathing. She was hyperventilating and hallucinating and foaming at the mouth, and I can't believe it. There were instructors that were there they were thinking that she was just being lazy because she's fat. But she was really like dehydrated and not getting enough energy, and she was suffering right there. She wasn't getting any care, and they were laughing at her for thinking that she's lazy, and they were drinking soda and stuff like that. And after they haven't really did anything about it, they ended up having to call 911, and she died because it was too late. They didn't care about her. So Harrison said, the abuse did not start and end with Gina's collapse or with the instructor's negligence, though. The abuse began with the idea that Gina ever needed to be punished for her weight in the first place. So the fact that she's in this thing called a fat camp, which I'm learning is just something that they put fat kids in, trying to, because they don't see that as the desirable quality. So they put these kids in these boot camps, these weight loss programs it's really like a form of punishment. And when we think of punishment, we think of prisons, and we have to look as thinness as this prison for fat people to confide in. And yeah, Harrison said fat kids are being penalized for their bodies, whipped into shape, disciplined for something the rest of the world views as an offense and a breach of an imagined moral code. And I think is it for that part. And then Harrison talked about diet culture, how that is harmful, because a lot of these diets, people are really starving themselves trying to be this desirable thin ideal. They're trying to reach that ideal of thinness. And Harrison says here, diet culture creates language like guilty pleasure and cheat day, which teaches one to associate foods that they love, that make them feel good, and that they actually find enjoyable with harm. And while it is taught that diets are necessary for one's survival, many of these short-term diets can lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and more. In fact, one study found that men with a fluctuating weight were at an 80% higher risk of dying than men who were overweight. Another study found that women who were yo-yo dieters were about 82% less likely to reach and maintain their ideal weight. So some people just want to go back into a weight that were in their young age. Like some people want to go back to the weight that they were in high school. And it's like, your body is never going to be the same as it was and before you were an adult. Sometimes it's not never going to be the same as it was when you were in your 20s and 30s. Like when you're in your 50s and 60s, your body is going to be operating differently, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Like, yes, you can exercise and all that stuff, but it's never going to function the same. Like, it's unrealistic. um and what they said here, fat liberation is an abolitionist affair. Abolition is a queer affair. Queerness is a fat affair. Liberation for each of them is linked. And what they also said here, it is the theft of a fat person's ability to see themselves as someone who matters. Theft of a person's right to see their body as neutral rather than inherently bad. A breach of consent on how a person enters into a relationship with their fat body. It is a war on the body, particularly and especially for the Black, and it is one that has been introduced and reintroduced since the transatlantic slave trade, which also transitions us into chapter 4, which is titled Black, Fat, and Policed, which, like, I know about these stories, but because of Harrison and the analysis that they put, I really look at these stories so differently now. And they brought up Eric Gardner, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Samuel DuBose, Alton Sterling, and George Floyd, which are all Black men, but they weren't just Black men. They are Black men that have a larger than average size, and some of them you could just say straight up they're fat, and because they are they are, it's not even just the fact that they're Black, but they're larger size. I'm thinking about when it comes to the European settlers during colonialism. They see the Black fat as ape-like, as non-human, and the men that I just listed here, they fit the archetype that that stereotype, because they see them as primitive savages. So they see them as people that need to be put in their place. They see them as animals that need to be tamed. So, like, let me see, because Eric Garner, he died because of because the police violated him. They suffocated him. But what the media, what the police have been saying is that he was dying because of the, I think he had like a heart disease. He had asthma or something like that. He was dying from that. And it's like, no, it was like you were choking him for a significant period of time to the point he lost his oxygen. And if we haven't seen body camera and all that evidence or something like that, it would have been easy to run with that. But once we saw the footage, we know the truth. And it's the same thing for Mike Brown, because Darren Wilson, the officer that killed Mike Brown, is not too much smaller than Mike Brown. So Darren Wilson was talking about how he was fearing for his life. Mike Brown didn't even have any weapons or anything like that. It's like, why are you scared of someone who just graduated from high school? Of course, because they're Black and fat. They fit that ape-like stereotype that whiteness has socialized into you. And yeah, Harrison said the only weapons Brown needed to possess were his fatness and his Blackness. So he was described as Hulk Hogan and things of that sort. Tamir Rice was I think he was 12 or 14, but like Tamir Rice was larger than the average 12-year-old. But when his murder happened, the police were acting like they don't know how old he was or something like that. They said like he was around 20-year-old. So there's this adultification for Black fat kids, or black larger than average size kids. So there's that. There's that. Contributing to Tamir's demise. And the same is said for like Walter Scott, Alton Sterling, and the recent murder of George Floyd, which is like signaling another wave of Black Lives Matter, and now going into the idea of defunding the police and stuff like that. So, and George Floyd also said, like, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And they try to make it seem like it was something else that killed him and not the fact that they were chokeholding him, even though when chokeholders were illegal. And that's the interesting thing. Like, choking was seen as illegal in some states. Like, even with Eric Garner is supposed to be illegal. But no, y'all care about the fact that he was fat and black. And he was going to die anyways. And let me see. I highlighted another paragraph. Deshaun, if you ever see this, like, you really snapped on this. Yes, Harrison said here, it is essential that the inherent fatness read onto black subjects and the health often always dissociated from the black fat is part of that narrative too. As already covered, the black is the fat, the belly is attached to the beast. This means that police and policing, especially in the United States, exist because the black fat is always be caged, just as a beast is always to be captured. And as such, being human is not the answer to anti-black violence, but rather for anti-black violence to exist, for there to be a slave, there must be the human. The black as the beast and the beast as the black are essential to the maintenance of the human, even and especially as the black slave objected are removed from humanness. In this way, black subjects are not denied humanity or dehumanized through slavery, but rather are forced to become the beast of humanity, the lowest on the scale of hegemonic humanity, and placed among the animal. And that goes into the institution of policing and how black fat subjects are also criminalized for their blackness and their fatness. And this is a long paragraph that I'm gonna read, so prepare for me. The idea behind the police force and overall policing was that since the slave was property and property had socioeconomic value, there was a need for an institution that could help maintain order among the enslaved should they ever become disruptive to the institution designed to cage them. This meant that the slave patrol had 3 duties: to catch all its enslaved people who ran away from the plantation, to take any and all action they deemed necessary to terrorize the enslaved as to prevent any type of revolt, and to borrow from the words of Foucault, part of the duty for the slave patrol was to discipline and punish any enslaved person who disobeyed the order and control of their enslavers. After the Civil War, the role of the slave patrol was modified and taken over by groups who saw a need to continue in a tradition of capturing, abusing, and ultimately murdering the black, most notably the Ku Klux Klan. But by this time, institutionalized police forces were already developed in almost every major city in the United States, and many of those officers took it upon themselves to use their position and power to work alongside the militia members who had not yet become part of the American policing institution. And I would say just go back into my Miriam Kaba, Angela Davis, and Derica Purnell, where they were talking about prisons, policing, and abolition. And they said pretty much the same thing and how police really came about. And let me see, and then I see anything else. And yeah, this is another thing that I've learned is that in I think it's court systems, there's this thing called a 2-ton contest, but it's affectionately known as niggers by the pound, that prosecutors and judges came about. It's just let me see if I found it. Said the sole objective was to be the first person to prosecute as many black people, most of whom were men, it took to amount to 4,000 pounds. The more one person weighed, the more points they were worth. And Here's how describe here's how you play. Look at the weight of the defendant in the case file. Convict the defendant and then tally the weight as a conquest to earn yourself points for pounds. One strategic tip: convictions of the heaviest defenders are worth big points in the game, so you must offer them good plea deals, regardless of their crime, to incentivize the conviction of the fattest defendants. Be the first prosecutor to convict 4,000 pounds of niggers and you win. That is Yeah, that is my first time learning about something like that. Like I've heard about peremptory strikes from Michelle Alexander, but this 2-ton contest, like, so they'll do whatever it is to criminalize people that are black and fat. Um, and and Harrison also talked about the same thing that Angela Davis said, like how prisons were actually supposed to be a reform from slavery, and how a lot of reforms are policies that were trying to just to change the system in a ways that make it more digestible and feasible, but it's still contributing to the structural violence that anti-Blackness and anti-fatness and any of other forms of oppressive structures are trying to maintain. So it's like, okay, we put windows on the cages or something like that. That could be a form of, that could be a reform or something like that to make them more exposed to the environment, but they're still in prison at the end of the day. And yeah, and and now with the decriminalization of marijuana and something like that, they'll try to come up with something else that will try to criminalize black people at disproportionate rates. Um, and what Harrison also said here, um, when it came to Eric Garner, what mattered was that before the officers that murdered them being Eric Garner and Mike Brown, both stood two giants, massive and uncontrollable animals, beings for whom innocence and childhood were never an afforded luxury, anti-fatness as anti-Blackness, the bellies of the beast. And that was it for chapter 4. So we're going to get into chapter 5, which I really understood more about what inspired Harrison to write something like this. Chapter 5 is titled "The War on Drugs and the War on Obesity." So if you look at to how if you all know about the war on drugs, we all know that it's there. It's made to criminalize black people, specifically black poor people, and black people that recreationally use crack and heroin and everything of that sort, and not realizing that some of them probably have addiction problems. They need mental health care. They need access to resources and rehabilitation, not to be put in prison. There's their war on obesity, and lo and behold, the CDC is involved in it. So the CDC released this report, I think in 2004, and saying how the obesity epidemic is contributing to 400,000 Americans a year from dying. But if we really want to go there, a lot of black fat people get mistreated in the medical in the medical industry. They die because they get misdiagnosed. So things of that sort. There wasn't care for the black fat. It's like another example. The way black women are treated in the medical industry is like black women are more likely to die from pregnancy than other women of other racial groups because of misogynoir. And it's the same thing for people that are black and fat. It's that same system that they had to navigate through. And then Harrison went into more into the BMI. And how the war on obesity, it's interesting how even with that, it was the report. Like I'm thinking about the Moynihan report and how it treated and how it contributed to these ideas of black women, about poor black women, and how literally this report by the CDC is doing the same thing, because it's not taking into consideration how black fat people are most likely to be unhoused and get better mental and health care. The report has been debunked so many times, like so many even people from the CDC were saying like how there were so many errors in this original report, but people are still taking it and running with it. Like it got to the point where politicians are establishing policies on how to discriminate fat people. It got to the point where media and the diet and industrial complex are taking advantage of it to make more money for from people that are fat. And yeah, all that is pretty similar to how the war on drugs treated black people. And Harrison said here, in January 2005, the CDC admitted that their 400,000 deaths number was a result of a mathematical error. And in February of that same year, just after the CDC published a summation of the internal investigation that was launched following the initial report's release, the Los Angeles Times published a response to the investigation. Their report opened with this firm statement: a controversial government study that may have sharply overstated America's death toll from obesity was inappropriately released as a result of miscommunication, bureaucratic snaffus, and acquiescence from dissenting scientists. This would become the second public acknowledgement of governmental disarray that was leading the nation in one of the most violent pseudo-epidemics in the nation's history. And we're still seeing that today, even with how the COVID pandemic, the CDC has been treating COVID. It was like they're saying we'll be back. We should be back to normal soon and stuff like that. But people are still dying in like significant rates. So it really tells you like the people that are put on this pedestal when it comes to science, when it comes to trying to respond to public health crises, you had to really go by your community. You really had to go by people that genuinely that are not approved by white supremacy to take these positions. You had to go by people that really did the work to research and come up with solutions and guidelines that can better save people and communities. And Harrison also said here, around the world, people were using the CDC's original numbers as fuel for the war waged on fat people. The government allocated more money to scientists for research on the harmful effects of obesity. The number of plastic surgeries, particularly abdominoplasty, best known as a tummy tuck, and liposuction, doubled in number from the start of the decade to the end of it. Gyms became anecdotally known as clubs of the 2000s. As gym memberships skyrocketed that decade, major diet industry companies like Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers changed their marketing schemes, which resulted in them ranking in millions of more dollars for the diet industry. And yeah, you can also tie with that with the war on drugs and how it's used to target a certain group of people. And Harrison brought up how the BMI scale was brought up. It was on page 79 and 80. So, obesity is determined by body mass index, the BMI, something people have been taught is a direct measure of one's health. Over 200 years ago, we're getting into some history, a Belgian man named Adolf Quetelet created what we know now as the BMI. Quetelet was not a physician, nor did he study medicine in any capacity. Quetelet was a mathematician and a sociologist, and it was that on which the BMI was created. Quetelet is known for his envisioning of l'homme moyen, an image of what he understood to be the average human, which he developed through the measurement of human features with a deviation plotted around the mean. He began the development with the use of physical features of the human, who, at least at his work suggests, he understood to be cisgender white men. Those features included the chests of Scottish Highland Regiment soldiers, and after he moved on to moral and intellectual qualities like suicide, crime, and madness. What he had created was a standard for male beauty and health, but built only with white Europeans in mind and determined by something that measured whole populations and not individuals. By the 20th century, Quetelet's work was being used as the basis of and justification for eugenics, and through all of his work in that time period was based in anti-black race science. He was clear that the intent of the BMI was to measure populations to develop statistics. So, don't believe me, it's right there. And Harrison also stated here, the world's obsession with obesity and being overweight is less about health and is more about the cultural and systemic anti-Blacknesses, anti-fatness that diet, medical, and media industries profit from. Just like with the war on drugs and the crack epidemic, major institutions falsified evidence about the effects of fatness or obesity as a way to criminalize and profit off fat people, especially the black fat. And that is it for chapter 5. And we're going to get into chapter 6, which is titled Meeting Gender's End, which I got a new analysis out. I got a new look about it because it's based off of the experiences of a community that I don't hear too much from, which are black transmasculine people and black trans men. And that's what Harrison wants to focus on in this book. Like it's more focused on people that are through the lens of a black transmasculine perspective, because they go through fat phobia in a different type of way. And we start with the idea of gender. And Harrison stated here, gender, just like health and desirability, is a system forged with the purpose of creating and maintaining a class of subjects designed to be inferior to another. The role of either gender is achieved through its continued performance. These roles and these performances are implied but also explicitly named characteristics and duties one must fulfill to be man or woman. They are not inherent to us, meaning we are not born as boys or as girls. In basic sociological terms, we are taught immediately after birth through social institutions like family, media, and school what role we must fulfill if we are to hold on to the gender we were assigned at birth. When we start breaking the rules of those assigned roles and thus falling outside the gender's hold, we become sissies or tomboys, depending on which role you were assigned to fulfill from birth. As Judith Butler states in her book, Gender Trouble, our behaviors and our gendered are not innate to us. We learn them, and then we learn to perform them, and this performance is policed and maintained by cis-heteronormativity, or the idea that everyone already is, and therefore all things must be seen as cisgender and heterosexual. In other words, cis-heteronormativity is the law and order of gender, and that it is what determines who is departing from their assigned role and must therefore be punished because of it. So this idea of gender, and if you do what are considered boy things, what are girl things, you are the outcast if you don't fulfill those roles that society has been placed on you. And it's another thing when you're trans. So that is something to get into. And let's see. And I appreciated the analysis as it specifically named the experiences of black transmasculine people, because they have to go through things like top surgery. So top surgery, people that are not fat, and so people that are fat that are trying to get top surgery, they get charged, they said, twice as much as people that are thin. So when it comes to gender affirming care, we need to really get into what can we do to make it support all people that are all people that need gender affirming care. And not even just for trans people. Cis people have gender affirming surgeries too, and but for people that are trans, there's a lot more hurdles that they have to go through. So I think they said someone was charged with like $15,000, and I'm like, oh my god, like it's wild how much it's really like making it hard for people to be affirmed in their identities. And based off of Harrison was interviewing 7 black trans people. I think all of them were trans masculine or identify as trans men. Harrison said it seemed like the consensus was that in order for one to be trans, at least a trans person who felt happy in their body, they would have to abandon fatness, not necessarily in word but in action. I started thinking, what about those of us who are fat and don't care to be anything else? How do we create a space where a flat chest doesn't have to mean thinness or muscularity, or a place where one doesn't have to be fixated on having a flat chest at all? Because as I see it, a muscular chest is not flat. In fact, many men, cisgender and otherwise, refer to their muscular chest as titties often. So what is it about the excess fat tissue that doesn't feel affirming? Is it the way it hangs? Is it that people know, subconsciously or unconsciously, the harm fat people experience? Or is it that one set of non-flat chests come with different social status than the other? So thinking about just a person that are not flat chested, so a person that has breasts or something like that, that's something that people that are trans masculine, they had to navigate those type of they encounter those type of discussions. And people and the desirable ones do not have breasts. The non-desirables, they keep it, or they do some alterations with it to still be affirmed in their gender. And another section that stood out to me was on, you say right here, Harrison said, so much so that many trans men and other wise non-binary masked folks feel that to be trans, they must be thin, muscular, because that's the only way to affirm their gender. Even though fat trans men, non-binary folks do exist with breasts or a big chest, we are most always never part of the ideal. So even when you're trans, there are some desirability politics has been affecting those communities, especially black trans people, because there's this image of what is, I think, and also in black lesbian culture, there's this idea of a stud, and what fits that idea is a thin, not flat-chested person. It's a thin, flat-chested person because it fits the masculine ideals that they want. And Harrison noted how that's even affecting in black trans masculine spaces. And let me see, I highlighted something else here. And also the dynamic of colorism comes into play, because Harrison says here, dark-skinned women oftentimes have masculinity projected onto them, whereas they are masculinized in a sense and therefore rejected access to femininity and thus desire. Light-skinned women, on the contrary, are expected to be feminine. Much of their social currency and desire capital is predicated on their ability to perform their gender in a way that is aligned with the social expectations of what femininity should and should not look like. And also said here, all 7 of them, the people that Harrison interviewed, in one way or another, talked about how much they had to almost force themselves into a space, how they had to forge their own paths, create their own gender within a gender, because their fatness had already denied them the ability to do anything but that. They each also presented this truth, even if unknowingly so. In so many ways, gender is defined by thinness, and that for one to fit comfortably into the performance, they must always be pushing away from fatness to not otherwise be engaged as the beast. So in short and sweet, is like when you're going through it's basically like gender and fat phobia also intertwine with each other, and they create a lot of harmful ideals that put black trans people in this place where when it comes to being affirmed in their gender, they is like all this body and gender confusions and dysmorphia that they might also get into. And not just for black trans people, black cis people also get affected by gender dysphoria and stuff like that. But when it comes to black trans experiences, it's really elevated to the point where gotten it gets to the point where it affects their self-esteem. It gets to the point where they get ostracized. They don't get taken into consideration in black trans spaces when it comes to, like, yes, there's racism, there's transphobia, but what about fat phobia? What about how we treat people of larger sizes? Those tend to get erased in the conversations, even though you would expect, like, the most oppressed people would care about everybody that's oppressed. And we all know that does not happen. It does not happen always. And it's really, you really got to be blessed with a community that wants to really actively try to push against those ideals and norms. And what Harrison is saying, that we need to abolish how abolish gender and how it's making us have these ways of thinking that are oppressive and damaging. And that is it for chapter 6. So we're going to go through this is the last chapter, y'all. Chapter 7 is titled Beyond Abolition. And this is a short and sweet chapter. I can really just give you a paragraph and it'll just say that. Harrison says here, what is rarely ever examined, though, in that systems and institutions are maintained by power but are created first through an idea. At the root, liberation must mean cultural revolution as well as a destruction of the sociopolitical institutions that hold these systems in place, which means that abolition cannot be the end. It must only be the beginning. As we discussed earlier in the book, the end goal must be a complete destruction of the world itself, whereby I mean that the world only exists because anti-black capitalist cis-heteropatriarchy systems of violence and domination exist and therefore must itself be destroyed. Systems are built by an idea, and the power to actualize the idea, which means that if abolition isn't only about eradicating systems or providing resources to people within the world through which those systems are created, it cannot be and is not enough. In other words, the world gives birth to and incubates these institutions. It is not created by them. So, to summarize that, it's not enough just to say we need to get rid of these systems of oppression. We need to create new systems to really have freedom and justice and liberation for all. So we have to have fatness as part of the conversation. How are we going to be treating people that are fat, especially people that are black and fat? They need to be into these discussions as well when it becomes to how the society views their size and how there's literally policies in place that are trying to harm and kill them. And that is Belly of the Beast by Deshaun Harrison. So yes, y'all, this is definitely a book that I'm gained so much from, and I like that. I forgot when was this published. It was released either a year or two ago, so it's a very fresh book that takes into consideration like things like gender, anti-Blackness and sexuality and things of that sort. So yeah, I hope y'all learned something from this too. And yes, I highly recommend this book because you're gonna have a new look at things after this. And I hope y'all have a great day. Stay tuned for another part. It may be soon, it may not. I don't know. Depends how I feel. But yeah, follow my My reading list page at Raisin Souls, and you can follow my personal Instagram at Intellectual Albert. And yes, take care.